Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Dave Jenkins. I think all of you know that. I kind of give you a little bit of update on me. I think all of you know I'm on 22 days of COVID. I just went to see the doctor this morning, and my weight's a little bit heavier than it was 3 weeks ago. My blood pressure's a little bit higher than it was 3 weeks ago. But the doc thought I looked in pretty good shape and said, "Hey, basically, after you have COVID, you're going to have a couple of weeks to a couple of months afterwards where your body comes back to normal. You're in that stage right now, and start going back and getting some exercise. And when you get tired, take a break." I typically right now my day looks like go for a walk, may try to do something, may need a nap. I have a little bit of energy, and I thought I need to talk to folks. And what I want to talk about, I've labeled it Missionary Reflections on the American election and on Christian citizenship. And if you have been following me on Facebook, you've seen me posting some things that others have been saying. I don't think I've said a whole lot, maybe a little bit of editorial. And this morning I got up and I saw that Christianity Today had an article. I saw that World Relief was making some statements. I saw a paper that um, a Baptist newspaper making some statements. I saw the Jesuits making some statements. And I thought it was really time for me to say a few things. And let me drink my coffee, trying to keep myself settled down. Occasionally, I would still have to cough a little bit. But I think everybody that knows me knows that my family has a habit of sitting around in the evening, drinking tea, and talking about life. And a lot of times that has some things we talk about with politics. And I think it's time for me now, okay, so here's what we've been talking about for the last about 10 days. And what I'm going to talk about also, there's some things that we do in ministry, either of past ministries or current ministries, or the way that we have to live in order to live, where what is going on that might be at a national stage in the policy discussions of the nation really do affect how we live or how we do ministry. So I really need to talk about this. Um, First thing I want to say is I've posted some things, and it's coming out of conservative journals, National Review and Wall Street Journal. I've seen the Wall Street Journal do this a couple of times in the last few days. It does seem to me that as we're trying to figure out what has happened with the election, that I think we're at a point where we as God's people have to come to the point of one of our spiritual principles is acceptance of it is what it is. And I think we're at a point where it's time to say, okay, the election looks like it had some irregularities, but it looks like it is what it is. And we've got to accept this and work with this. And frankly, yeah, we're going to find some irregularities. And I've lived in Illinois, and I know that Illinois has gerrymandered themselves. So basically, even when the more people vote Republican, you're still going to end up with a Democratic House. And you go north of Illinois and you go to Wisconsin, and it's gerrymandered so that the Republicans have advantage. And if I go to certain southern states, I'm going to say, yeah, there was really voter suppression that happened there. And if I go to certain urban areas, I realize, yeah, and the Democrats manipulated things here. That it is what it is. And I think those of us that are people of God and faith, yeah, we need to say it is what it is. We got to accept the results, but yet it wasn't perfect. It had moments of injustice. So we say, okay, we know folks that are working against injustice. We'll keep doing that. In 2 years and 4 years from now, we're going to address this. But it's time to come to terms. It is what it is. We have to live in community. We can't live in constant turmoil. Saying it is what it is, this is my appraisal of where we stand. I my appraisal of the American political experience is we've had at least 10 years, maybe more, in which our governance has been paralyzed by partisanship. And what has happened is those that are governing basically are pushing to the point of they either govern through court law or they govern through executive action. But our political system has been so paralyzed by partisanship, we haven't been governed by legislation, by actually passing laws very often. And as I'm looking at our current political situation in the United States, here's my appraisal of it. It being it is what it is, we might disagree, but it is what it is. It looks to me like we have a large number of judges in the upper echelon that are resistant to creating law, they just want to interpret it. It looks to me like Joe Biden is going to be our next president. And Joe Biden, though we might have disagreements with some of the things, is a decent man and he's moderate. He's not pushing extreme things. He's trying to figure out, how do I govern from the center? It looks to me like it's likely that the Republicans will control the Senate and the Democrats will control the House. And it looks to me like the American voters largely have said, we reject Donald Trump, but we don't want to be governed by the extremes. We want to be governed by the moderates. When I look at the Senate, which is going to be really, if we desire to be legislated, I see that we're sitting at a point where it could either be very partisan, where you're going to have just a little bit more Republicans than Democrats, and the system would allow obstruction to happen. But you've also got 3 senators. You've got Mitt Romney in Utah and Susan Collins in Maine, who have shown that they will go across the aisle. On the Democratic side, you've got Joe Manchin from West Virginia that's shown he'll go across the aisle. So you basically have 3 senators out of 100 that have shown they'll go across the aisle to govern. Here's what I'm going to say for just an ordinary folk. I vote almost every election. I didn't vote this year because I was too sick. I could not keep my head. I was going to do a mail-in, and my head was hurting too much through COVID for me to vote. But when it was all said and done, my vote wouldn't have changed much of anything. I would have just been a protest vote. I do, however, write and make phone calls, and I usually get replies. And I've one time had lunch with a U.S. senator. And I have about 4,000 friends on Facebook. I have about close to 2,000 on Twitter. I have a little bit of a network. When I do something like this, a Facebook Live, I usually get a couple hundred to a couple thousand people that watch, and maybe 50 to 100 of them will follow through with my suggestions. I think right now we're in a state where, if it is what it is, and my appraisal is right, we are at a point where really the United States could be governed. There is a point where I think there's enough institutional things where if we, the population, we, the voters, would sit down and write letters and make phone calls to our legislators, I think most of them would listen and we could govern from the center. Now, I'm going to give you 3 things that mean something to me that I think it's time for us as God's people to say, ask our folks, from the center, can we govern from the center? Can we look for what we have consensus with and seek the common good? 3 things jump out to me, and they're personal and they're ministry related. 1, Jana and I have at times done Christian ministry with Christian organizations which have been thoroughly pro-life and have had a thorough pro-life agenda. I find abortion to be morally, most of the time, reprehensible, most of the time morally unacceptable. But here's the consensus in the United States. Most people in the United States do not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. Most people also want to see abortion to decrease. They want to see less abortions in the country. I don't agree with that consensus, but I have to live with it. I'm going to encourage you, as God's people trying to be good citizens, to right now start writing your legislators and calling them and say, please govern towards the consensus. And what I'd ask for you to do in doing that is say, hey, even if I disagree with your position on abortion, or even if I fully agree with it, can you promote legislation that decreases abortion rates? Let's make sure we have sex ed in school. Let's make sure we have maternity leave. Let's make sure we have a social network that if somebody is in a vulnerable situation with a pregnancy, they can say, I think I'm going to be okay to at least have a healthy birth and be able to just have food in front of me and find hope. Write our legislators and ask for them to govern towards the middle to decrease abortion. A second thing, I think you see this. I'm working with my own small nonprofit. I'm going to take a part-time job working with another immigration organization in a few weeks. I believe that immigration is an issue that we've got to address in this country. And I'm going to say again, can we govern, ask our legislators to govern for consensus? The consensus in this country is immigration is a mess and we want immigration reform. Almost everybody I know, all the surveys say that. Our nation is saying let's ask our legislators to govern for immigration reform. And I'm going to be real practical with this. I think almost every one of us knows somebody who is an immigrant to this country, who we like, who we've seen do good things, and we've seen their family life be full of unnecessary turmoil. And it might be somebody who's our kids play soccer with. It might be somebody that our kids go to school with and they do some academic thing. It may be a mechanic or a business owner or a restaurant owner or some group that uses our church. But we see immigration's a good thing, and there's a quagmire that's going on. We've seen good people be hurt because our immigration system isn't functional. Now, those of us that spend more time with immigrants also recognize occasionally we see somebody who really manipulates the system and our guts hurt and it makes us mad. Let's sit down and call and write our legislators and say it's time to respect the consensus of the American people and govern towards the consensus. It's time to get reform done. And it may not be a perfect reform. And on all of our perspectives, we're all going to have to give something. But it's time to have some immigration reform. There's consensus, and I think our governance structure is ready for it. Third thing I'm going to mention, this is personal again. I said, okay, I've got a conviction about abortion. I've got a conviction about immigration. Both of those come out of ministries where I'm making my living at. But a third one is healthcare. Now, where I think there's consensus in this country is I think that the majority of folks in this country are dependent on their health care through their job, and they're content with it, and they don't want it to be changed. But yet there's a portion of us in this country that cannot get health care through our job. We have tried over and over. We can't find that type of work. The only type of work we can find is part-time work, or we just realize we got to start something. I can't get good work. I'm going to have to start my own thing, and I'm going to have to find health care for my family. And basically, the Affordable Care Act, or what some people call Obamacare, is the only option I can find that works. And that's 20 million of us in this country. There is consensus right now amongst the American people because we all know somebody who's got their health care through their employment, and we all know somebody who is a hard worker, but the only place they can get their health care is through Obamacare. It is what it is. In 20 years from now, it will probably have some changes. But today, this is what it is. And let's call our legislators and say, hey, let's govern for consensus. Let's govern for a common good. Let's improve both Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, and let's work so people aren't going to lose their health insurance through their jobs. Let's govern for consensus. Saying that, here's my words for you today. I think as God's people, particularly if we're American citizens, we are called to be good citizens. We're called to make our communities better, and that has a political implication many times. We voted, or at least I wanted to vote. I couldn't because I was too sick to think, but we tried. We voted, and we're now at a point where really it is what it is. Yeah, we can find some things that we disagree with. We can find some irregularities, but honestly, it's time to let go of the fighting and say it is what it is, and let's accept it. Let's come to terms with it. And my own appraisal of where the country's at politically is I think for the first time in about 10 years, you might actually be in a spot where it might be possible to govern this country. And I think it's possible if we as God's people will say, okay, I'm going to write my legislators and call them and encourage them not to take extreme partisan positions, but govern towards the consensus and look for where the people are having consensus and what is a common good. And let's promote that. In the three areas that jump out to me, and I know that all of you would have your own areas, but one is abortion. It's time for many of us say, okay, I can't change all the legality, but I know that most people in this country want to decrease abortion, so let's ask my legislators to put policies in place to decrease abortion. For most of us also, my second issue is immigration. Most of us know immigrants that have really been treated poorly in this country because the law system doesn't work. And it's time for us as God's people to say, I'm going to speak up for my immigrant neighbor and call my legislator and ask for him to govern towards consensus. And the third one that I'm going to say is health care. It's really not right to take people's insurance away if they're working and they've got good health care, and it's not right to take people's insurance away if they can't find it through their employer. Let's call our legislators and say, improve Obamacare, and let's keep the systems that are working for a good portion of our people still working. God's blessings on all of you. Again, it's time to come to acceptance, be a good citizen, and call and ask for our legislators to govern for a common good. Thanks for listening to me. Bye-bye.